It's amazing how much the SCP universe has blown up in the past few years. At the time of writing, there are almost 6,000 articles and entries on the main site, and that's not counting side stories, joke SCPs, explained SCPs, and so on. It's pretty impressive that a group of online writers have been able to create a universe on the sheer scale of the SCP wiki. This explosion of popularity has started to seep into other mediums in and around the internet. In recent years, a number of fan-made movies, games, and animated series have emerged into the public eye. But before I go on, there's a small chance that you, the person watching this, may not even know what the SCP universe is. So on the off chance that my mom and dad find this video, hi mom and dad, I'll give a brief explanation of what the SCP wiki is. Basically, it's a site in which people can submit and share scary stories, but there are two things that make this website unique from other scary story websites like the Creepypasta wiki. First of all these stories are supposed to take place in the same universe and operate under similar rules. The second is how these stories are written in the first place. Instead of a story being written in a classic third or first person account, the story was written as a case file. See, within the world of SCP, there's a group called the SCP Foundation, which is a secret organization that's focused on finding, acquiring, and researching paranormal entities and creatures, partially to find out how they work and partially to make sure they aren't discovered by the wider world and cause panic. And when I mean paranormal, I don't mean a puppy with two tails or a guy who actually likes raisins in his pastries or a positive review for the movie United Passions. No, I mean living decomposing corpse who can walk through walls and cause anything and everything it touches to corrode type of paranormal. When the Foundation finds and captures one of these paranormal entities, it's imprisoned in a secret Foundation research site where a document is written up giving its description, what makes it paranormal, and how it's contained. And these things are now referred to as an SCP. They're also given a designation number like SCP-173 or SCP-096 or something like that. The things that the Foundation capture vary wildly from supernatural people, creatures, objects, or sometimes places and events. These are usually the main focus on the site, but there are a few straightforward first or third person stories here and there. If you want a more in-depth explanation on how the SCP Wiki and universe work, there are several other videos on the topic. The Volgun and the Exploring series both did videos going over the basic concept of the SCP Wiki. Daphne, I think that's his name. Daphne and Frederick Knudsen both did videos on the history and origin of the site, and that's just the ones I know of. But today I don't want to talk about just any SCP article. I want to discuss something special and I feel doesn't get enough attention. Earlier I mentioned that every SCP has a number. Naturally, some big name numbers are coveted by people within the community. No slot has been more contested than the slot to be number 1 itself. Since being able to call yourself number 1 was such a special honor, it couldn't be occupied by just any SCP. So a contest was formed to decide who gets to have the number 1 headband. The contest goes as such. Users would submit proposed articles for what SCP-001 should be, and the winner gets to keep the position. At the time of writing, there are a whopping 32 entries to the 001 slot, and I have no idea who's going to win at this point. So today, I want to do something I've observed not a lot of people try and do. I'm going to try and read and explain all 32 SCP-001 proposals and any new ones that come out after that. Let's get on to the first and probably the most famous of the SCP-1 proposals. If you've looked into what SCP-1 is, there's a high chance that you've heard of the Gate Guardian. When you first access the document for the Gate Guardian, you're greeted with this slightly ominous picture. The description says that SCP-1 is a humanoid figure with glowing wings that's approximately 700 cubits tall. That's just a bit shorter than the Zaifeng Tower in Nanjing. The entity doesn't move at all and is located somewhere near the intersection of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Iraq, placing it here-ish. There are two main things you need to know about SCP-001. First of all is that it's holding a big-ass glowing sword that generates heat rivaling the sun, and the second is that it's standing in front of a giant gate/portal, hence the name. The SCP Foundation conducted a handful of tests on the Guardian, and learned that anyone who gets within exactly 1 kilometer from the entity is obliterated by a blast of energy from its sword. Also, any hostile or perceived hostile action taken against the Guardian, regardless of range, is subject to the same attack. And considering you're basically being hit by a controlled solar flare, nothing to date has survived trying to provoke the Guardian. Another thing are the commands. Anyone who's exposed to the Guardian from a safe distance is given a mental one-word command that can't be ignored. Most people are given the command to forget, which causes them to leave the area and forget what they saw. Among the tests conducted on SCP-001, the Foundation tried sending in a manned drone, 100 manned drones that would fly over the 1 kilometer mark at exactly the same time, and firing an intercontinental missile at it. The first drone got destroyed, obviously. The fleet of drones all approaching at the same time all got destroyed, and the onlookers described it as, and I quote, like the Guardian attacked in multiple directions all at once. In regards to the missile, the only description of that experiment says See Indian Ocean Missile Experiment, December 26, 2004. If you Google that date, the first thing that comes up is a story about a massive tsunami in Indonesia. In another experiment, the Foundation attempted to expose the Guardian to two other SCPs they had in their containment, those being SCP-073 and SCP-076, codenamed Cain and Abel respectively. And for the record, those are not just fancy codenames. Both are widely believed to be Cain and Abel themselves, though their roles are switched up from what you'd expect. Abel hates everything and anything, and when he wakes up from his stone coffin that he's being imprisoned in, he goes on a killing spree with weapons he's pulled out of a shadow dimension. Meanwhile, Cain is a lot more calm and helpful than his brother. He has a photographic memory and remembers everything from the past 10,000 years, and also any damage done to him is reflected onto the person who did it. He also has a symbol on his head, but I don't think the document describes it in very much detail. So the Foundation takes 076, the area where the Guardian is located. He takes one look at it, says something to the effect of, screw that, and walks off. When they brought 073 to the Guardian, he started to panic, and when the scientists refused to let him leave, something started to happen to the symbol on his forehead. Though what exactly it is removed from the document. That's another thing to note about SCP documents. Sometimes information or blocks of text are blacked out or expunged entirely. There are usually two reasons for this. One, even within the Foundation, the information is so top secret that not everyone is privy to it. Or two, certain information or images can screw up a person's mind. These things are usually called cognitohazards, and seeing or learning or even understanding them can cause someone's mind to become modified, most of the times fatally. That's what the swirly pic earlier on was referencing. Place your bets. Was whatever happened to 073 so big that not everyone needed to know what it was, or would knowing literally fritz your brain? By now you've probably figured out what this SCP is at least based off of. The Guardian is supposed to be the angel Uriel, and the gate is the gate to the Garden of Eden. But there are two more interesting things I want to go over regarding this SCP-001. In the document, it's stated that the founder of the SCP organization first discovered the Guardian years ago and was given the command to prepare, which made him build the SCP Foundation and start researching the paranormal. That's a common theme around a lot of SCP-001 proposals. Many of them try to create a possible origin for the Foundation, or for some of the major concepts within the universe. But before I'm done, I don't think I would be doing this proposal justice if I didn't mention the final transmission. Since SCP-001 does not move and can't be moved, the Foundation has it monitored 24/7 and makes sure that nobody else finds it. The final part of the document details a transmission allegedly from an indeterminate amount of time in the future, where the Guardian actually moves from its position and thousands of other entities like it charge out of the gate to enact the events of Revelations. The Gate Guardian is easily the most popular of the 001 proposals and has spawned a ton of fan art and side stories surrounding it. It's even been referenced or featured in a couple of other articles like in SCP-1730. I like it because despite it being about angels in the Garden of Eden, this is a great piece of cosmic horror. To me, cosmic horror works best for two reasons. One is the sheer overwhelming power that the monster holds over humanity and the fear of the unknown. Despite what we can extrapolate about SCP-1, we still know very little about it, and what we do know shows that it's much, much more powerful than us. It's what we don't know that makes this story terrifying. Why did the Guardian tell the Founder to prepare? What happened to Cain and why was it removed from the document? Exactly how many years into the future is the transmission from? All this is intentionally left unanswered, and I think that's what pushes this from good to great. This next proposal, called the Sheaf of Papers, puts a bit of an interesting spin on the question of where all these strange and wonderful things in the SCP universe come from. Like the Gate Guardian, this SCP-001 gives us a lot of unanswered questions. The difference here is that in the Gate Guardian story, it's somewhat implied that there are answers out there somewhere, but it's far too important for us regular folk. In Sheaf of Papers, there are a lot of unanswered questions, and it's implied that nobody has any real answers to them. So is that better or worse? The first thing one sees when accessing this document is that it's given the object class of Keter. This basically means that whatever this thing is, it's very difficult to keep contained. This isn't helped by the first thing being said about it, is that there are no adequate containment procedures to deal with SCP-001. At the moment, SCP-001 is stored in a code-locked briefcase behind a boatload of security cameras and guards. If you thought this SCP is a sheaf of papers, you're correct. Specifically, it's a sheaf of papers that says Confidential Report on Special Items Classified. It first appeared in the office of someone whose name is blanked out in the document, and when he opened it, he found a description for SCP-002. SCP-2 is a giant tumor with an apartment inside it. Are you just now realizing the SCP universe is really weird? Not long later, SCP-002 was actually discovered in a crater in Portugal. Later on, the guy who got the document went back to check it and found out that it had been changed to describe SCP-003. And the next time it was 004 and 005 and so on. There are a few parts of this that are a little bit confusingly worded for me. In one line it implies that they've confined SCPs out in the wild and the report will change to reflect that, but another line says that no new SCPs show up unless the file is opened. Some people within the Foundation want to use SCP-001 as an early warning system to try and get a drop on other SCPs, or possible world crises, but the SCP Foundation's administration is staunchly against that and has insisted that the file be kept under maximum security and only accessed during rare occasions. This proposal is not very long, that's basically it, but it's still an interesting idea. This last proposal we're going to look at shakes up the document's format a bit. It's worded completely differently from what you'd expect, and there's no object class. In its place is a warning tag that says that item displays aggressive and dangerous behavior. Also, unlike most SCP articles, we get a description first before containment procedures. The item, it's never called an SCP, is described as being 6 feet tall, skinny looking, with clawed hands and legs ending in points. It also has a funny shaped head and some kind of eye orb that appears out of its mouth. But hey ladies, he is 6 feet tall. Apparently this thing was found in Guatemala, date earlier this week, and was reported by the locals as some sort of screaming demon. Not long after that, people started showing up in nearby hospitals with severe radiation poisoning, and those are the ones that made it back alive. This caught the attention of a military base called ADRX-19. The general there, named General McCoy, sent out a recovery team that was able to catch the creature before it promptly escaped and killed several more people. Apparently, this thing can create micro-singularities that generate a shit ton of radiation, hence the irradiated villagers, and allow the thing to teleport from one place to another. The soldiers somehow figured out the monster can't teleport or make singularities through lead and is afraid of light and high temperatures. So they built a cell lined with lead and covered in floodlights to prevent it from escaping again. It also sometimes makes a loud screeching noise that some people have interpreted as trying to communicate, but all attempts to talk to it have failed. I'm guessing that was a pretty one-sided conversation. The document ends with two things. First, it mentions that additional objects have been reported in the area, possibly other SCPs, and that the overseers of the base should consider converting ADRX-19 into a dedicated containment facility. It also mentions that future reports may need censorship for security reasons. This is a short one, and whilst the document may seem straightforward on the surface, and it's presented as possibly the first paranormal anomaly that the Foundation discovered, there are several small subtleties that form some of the fundamentals of the Foundation's way of operation. For starters, one of the people killed by the monster when it broke out was called Dr. Herman Keeter, which is where one can deduce the Keeter classification comes from. Secondly, the base this all started in is called ADRX-19, which might be a reference to an area called Site-19, a research facility in the SCP universe. Site-19 is widely considered to be located somewhere in America, but SCP-001 was first found in Guatemala, so it's probably not the same place. It's more likely that later on Site-19 was constructed in America, and whatever was found in ADRX-19 was moved there. I don't have any concrete evidence of this, but I do have a theory. In another article called SCP-173, one of the only pieces of information we have on it says that it was moved to Site-19 in the early 90s. It never even says where from. Since SCP-173 is actually the first SCP ever written, it's possible that within the universe of the Foundation that was one of the additional objects that was reported at the end of the document. There are a few other things we can pick up on. It's highly likely that the soldiers who found this thing were American. I'm no history major, but some Googling helped me find out that America helped a coup in Guatemala in 1954, which gives us a definitive date when this happened. Some people who've read this say that it feels a bit rushed, and I don't mean badly written. I mean in context, whoever wrote this was rushing to get it done. Also, it's vague and doesn't give many names and no concrete dates or locations, with only a footnote saying that future documents should be censored more. This gives credence to the theory that it was written in a hurry, and that finding this thing caused a lot of chaos and upheaval within the base. It seems like the name The Prototype isn't referring to the monster, but the document itself and the people that found it, since they became the genesis of what would eventually become the SCP Foundation. Well, that looks like all for now. I'll definitely do more of these in the future because there's some crazy stories in the 001 proposal. And yes, that means I'm going to have to do the Ouroboros cycle, all of it, and I'm not entirely looking forward to that. Nothing against Ouroboros cycle, it's just that it's very long. It's easily the longest story in the entire site, but we'll get there when we get there. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to SCP Declassified that helped explain a lot of these proposals, break it down to make them a lot more logical. You should check that out if you're interested in SCP stuff. Next time I'll try and cover the story When Day Breaks. For now, only time will tell what we'll do. So, it's been a wild ride. I'll see you guys next time.